Hi, folks. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the next branch of government. We're going to be looking at the executive branch and the presidency. So, this is for notes 3.5, the roles and powers of the president. So, I want to get started off talking about the qualifications for president. So, specifically, what does it take to become president? And the formal requirements, these usually are listed in the Constitution. One, you must be 35 years old. So you have to be 35. You have to be a natural born citizen, so someone born here or naturalized. And you must have resided in the United States for 14 years. Now, we also have some informal requirements, and those are in quotes because it's not necessarily listed in the Constitution that these are the requirements for being the president. However, commonly or most often, these are things that all of the presidents share. Now, all of them except for one are have been white, male, and Protestant. Obviously, Barack Obama is that exception. All manner of professions. There is nothing in the Constitution that states the president has to be of a certain profession, but most of the time, presidents come from political backgrounds, like governors, Congress people, for example. Again, there are exceptions to that, but those just tend to be informal requirements. So, really quickly, I want to touch on how do you get to the presidency because we're about to see this process here unfold. And there are elections every 4 years, and those occur in even numbered years. So, after this year in 2020, the next election will happen in 2024 for the presidency. And they are voted in by the Electoral College, not directly by the people. So, the Electoral College votes for president, and how the number of electors is determined is this formula right here. So the number of electors that each state has is equal to the number of the state's representatives plus the number of senators. So, for example, you can see Ohio here. We have 18 electoral votes, right? All states have two senators. So that means we have 16 representatives and two senators, making up 18 electoral votes. And as you can see, states with higher populations have more electoral votes. So that means the total of electoral votes is 538. And the reason it's 538 and not 535, if you remember back to that 23rd Amendment, Washington, D.C. gets three electoral votes with the 23rd Amendment to be able to vote for president. Now, to win the presidency, you need to grab 270 electoral college votes to win. It doesn't matter how you win them, like in terms of what states, but you need to win at least 270. And if there is no majority winner, if no one receives 270 votes, the decision of the president goes to the House of Representatives. Now there really is, excuse me, one big limitation to the presidency. If you remember us talking about limited government and checks and balances, this will be familiar. Presidents can be impeached, meaning they can be removed from office if they violate the Constitution, for example, break a law, things like that. Now, only three presidents have ever been impeached. That would be President Trump, President Clinton, and President Johnson. But none of them were actually convicted or removed from office. Nixon probably would have been impeached, but he resigned before the impeachment process could be completed. Now, when I say they've been impeached but not convicted, what I mean is that they were impeached by the House. Impeachment, as we've talked about, starts in the House of Representatives. That's where they're kind of deciding, are there or is there enough evidence to prove that the president or official violated the Constitution, maybe abused power? If they are impeached in the House, it then goes to the Senate. And the Senate acts as a jury and decides if the official is removed from office. So, really deciding the conviction. Okay. And in all three of these cases, the Senate has voted to not convict the president. So let's talk about the roles of the president. What powers, right, separation of powers does the president have, and how can the other branches of government check those powers? So there are six roles. The very first role is that of chief executive and administrator, right? You're told from an early age that the role of the executive branch is to execute or enforce the law. So, what does that actually mean? To enforce means to carry out. So, if the president is enforcing, they are carrying out valid laws of Congress regardless of their own view of that policy essentially. So no, even if basically what that's saying, guys, is even if they disagree with the law, they are constitutionally upheld to carry it out. As the chief executive and administrator, part of the role that's actually really important, and as we're seeing right now, is appointing key federal officials that would include things like the Supreme Court, the cabinet, which we'll talk about in a second. And what's important here as a check on this power is that those positions must be approved by the Senate. Just as a rule, like a formula, if it helps you, if there's really anything, excuse me, that the president needs approved, it's going to be the Senate that does it. Now, the president also does something called granting pardons as chief executive. And if you are being pardoned, that means you are being excused from blame. So, pardons are usually given to people who have broken the law. For example, if you dodge the draft, meaning you're drafted to go to war, and you just don't go, that's treason. That's a crime. That's a federal or a felony. Presidents in the past have pardoned people who dodged the draft, and they can no longer be given consequences for their actions. As chief executive and administrator, the president is the boss or in charge of quite a few different people at the White House. And the first is the vice president. And really, the vice president is kind of the assistant to the president. They're basically waiting for things to do for the president to delegate out powers to. Remember from our conversation on Congress, the vice president is also the president of the Senate, but remember, they only vote if there's a tie. They have no real formal role in the Senate. The cabinet is also a group that the president is in charge of, and the cabinet is the presidential advisors. Now, this group is not in the Constitution, but they advise the president on various things. So, like the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Education. They're the people giving the president advice on issues that affect the country. And just like we saw with like the Supreme Court justices, these members have to be confirmed by the Senate. Now, the president is also in charge of something that we call the bureaucracy, and these are non elected people who work for the government. And really, the bureaucracy, without getting too much into it, this is really what makes our government function. This is really what helps the president enforce and carry out the laws that Congress makes. So, for example, the cabinet members that I was talking about really help make up that bureaucracy, right? We've got Department of Housing, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Agriculture, Education. All of these departments are part of the bureaucracy. And finally, the president is in charge of the White House staff. And these are the most loyal group to the president. You have the chief of staff, press secretaries, speechwriters. These are really the people that the president is going to be in contact with every single day. They're giving him campaign advice, getting him to meetings, organizing, pretty much everything that the president does. Now, the second role of the president is chief legislator. So The president has a very close relationship with Congress. The president is able to shape what we call public policy or the actions that government takes. And usually the president will follow the views of their party. So, as a Republican, for example, Donald Trump will introduce laws that are supported by his Republican Party. So, as chief legislator, and as we talked about again with bills becoming laws, the president is responsible for signing and vetoing legislation. Now, remember, as a check on that power, Congress can override that veto with two-thirds of a vote in both houses. But overall, that is a check on the president's power. As a citizen, the president can introduce legislation into Congress. And they work with Congress on many issues like war, for example, which we'll talk about, and also the budget, forming the federal budget. So, with this, the Congress will declare war, but the president will wage war. What that means is Congress has to officially vote on whether or not we go to war. And once that declaration of war is made, the president will actually wage or carry out the war. The president submits the federal budget and requests that certain money be put into certain departments or topics, but it's Congress that approves that budget. So you can see here we've got separation of powers. Congress is the only one that can declare war, um, but there is checks as well, right? Without the president waging war, without Congress declaring war, the two can't complete those actions. Number three, political party leader. So, the political party that the president is a part of will take cues from the president. Something else that the president can do is offer candidates of their party support by backing or supporting a bill of theirs if they think it's a really good idea. They can help support their run for office. They can endorse them. That's what we call that. Or if the candidate does something to maybe upset the president, they could withhold favors or withhold endorsing that candidate. As political party leader, the president also helps to raise money for the political party. When we get to campaigns, you'll see that money is, or that plays, I should say, a huge role in getting people elected into office. Number four is the president is the leader of the people or the chief citizen. Right, I know we have the electoral college, but really this is the only person to be elected by every American. And as the leader of the people, the chief citizen, the president is supposed to represent the American people and work for the good of the American people. They're supposed to uphold the standard of what an American should be. They also must have character as a result. Because think about it, if the person that is in office is not likable, then the people will not vote for them. So that's what I mean when I say power comes from the people, right? Popular sovereignty. The people are the ones that give the government power. And that's why when it comes to chief citizen, presidential approval ratings are so important. How the people view what the president is doing and how favorable that is. Now, this is going to drive the action of the White House. If the White House sees that approval ratings are dipping, they're going to take action to try and get that to go up. And a presidential approval rating actually determines how much a president is able to do while in office. If the approval rating is high, Congress is more likely to work with the president and get things done because the public is overall happy with how the country is going. Now, over time, what we see is that presidential approval usually goes down over time, it decreases. Reason being, they've been in office for longer. There are events that happen that might upset some people. There might be laws that are made that are not favorable for certain groups of people. That's part of the reason why we see. I'm going to use President Bush here as an example. In 2001, right after 9/11, his approval rating was at an all time high of 86%. But by the end of his term, based on how a lot of things had gone in the country, right, with the war on terror, No Child Left Behind, his approval rating had dipped to 22%. So, just to show you again kind of the average presidential approval for the entire term in office, you can see, oftentimes these with higher ratings often are viewed more favorably. Number 5 is chief diplomat or chief of state or head of state. And in this role, the Constitution says that the president may negotiate treaties with other countries. Now, just like we've seen, that has to be approved by the Senate. The president will also meet with members of other countries as well, to maybe talk about deals, trade agreements, just to make things peaceful between countries. It doesn't necessarily need to be to negotiate a treaty, but just to have a conversation to keep our alliance maybe going. And also, as chief diplomat, the president carries out ceremonial functions, so like throwing out a pitch at a baseball game, for example. And then finally, the president is commander in chief of the armed forces. So, this is what I mean when I say the president wages war. They run the armed forces. That includes the standing military and the military arsenal. So, the like weapons and technologies that we have in our military as well. Now, they do work with Congress on this, as we've talked about, the budget, especially when it comes to the military. And without a congressional declaration of war, the president cannot send troops to another country. Now, the extent of this power and this role was unthinkable when we wrote the Constitution because the budget currently is $601 billion. Dollars. That amount of money is unthinkable to our founding fathers. And of course, back then we didn't have nuclear weapons, right? Now the president is in charge of, deciding if we have to use nuclear weapons, right? We've avoided that since World War II, but that is what I mean when I say the military arsenal. All right, guys, that is it for this video. Go ahead and make sure to rewind, go back and rewatch anything if you need to, and answer the questions in Edpuzzle. Your goal for today was to explain the roles and responsibilities of the president and the executive branch. So if you have questions, make sure to let me know, and I will talk to you guys soon. See ya.